Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar on getting started with form building. I'll be your host today and my name's Berit Johannesson. Our presenter is going to be Jonathan Su. Next, we always like to go through just a little bit of what's coming in the near future and what's new. So we have two amazing blog posts that have recently become available. The first one is the role of support, making the most of field service solutions. And the second is locating water infrastructure more easily. Both of these are links, so when we send over the presentation later, you feel free to click the link and access it from the presentation. You can also access our blog post at any time at zerionsoftware.com and then under the blog section. We have three upcoming webinars. The first is what can I do with APIs? This is our next one, and it is November 16th. For any of you who are developers and looking to really learn more about the API, I highly suggest that you attend this session. Next, we have our Cooking with Zerion annual session. This is a wonderful session for you to come and learn some of the ingredients that our team sees to make things successful within Zerion. And then the next and final one that we have of the year is hot links. So if you're interested in learning more about hot links and learn a little bit about some projects that are using hot links, we do suggest attending that session. Now, before I jump over and hand everything over to John, we do have some quick polls just to kind of understand our audience a little bit better. The first one I'm going to launch now, and it's just going to ask if you are a current user. So if everyone could go ahead and fill that in, that would be great. While you're filling it in, if this is your first time attending, this session is recorded and the presentation materials will be sent over to you or made accessible to you. In the next 48 hours, we will send an email to you that will have the link to the page with all these resources and additional ones. We'll also make a course in Zerion Academy and make sure that you're a member of Zerion Academy so that you can access that this session as well as any other sessions we've had. So it looks like everyone has responded to the poll, and John, just so you know, we have 67 people who use iForm Builder and 33 people who do not have a current account. And then the last one that I'm going to launch now is just how experienced you are with building mobile forms. So if everyone could go ahead and respond to that too, that would be wonderful. And once all the results come here, I will show everyone what those results are so we can kind of gauge the experience level that we have. So here are the results. Looks like we've got some new beginners and some who are familiar with doing the basic forms, but not anyone yet in the smart controls. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our wonderful presenter, Jonathan Su.
Thank you, Berit. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Su. I am a solutions engineer over here at Zerion Software, and then I focus on doing training and then some of the projects and implementation. What we're going to be going over today is getting started with form building, as the title of the webinar says. Now, based on the poll results, I think that this is the perfect audience for this webinar. I'm not concerned with going into the specifics of building advanced forms and a lot of the higher capabilities of the form builder that you can use, but I really wanted to have a webinar that would provide people who are a little bit newer to form building a basis and a foundation to grow from. In order to do this, what we're going to be going through is 4 different steps. We're going to start off by having a discussion around setting up your workspace. This is going to include some of the different views in the form builder, as well as how to set up your browser as a tool to use to make sure that when you build forms, it's going to be as smooth of an experience as possible. After that, we're going to jump back out of the form builder and do a little bit of an overview of the elements in form building. So for those of us who are pretty new to form building or have never built a mobile form before, elements are going to be the fundamental building blocks of a form. And so it's important to know what tools are in your toolkit that you can use. So we're going to be going through those in a pretty good level of detail. After that, I want to highlight option lists As one of the key features in building mobile data collection forms, option lists are going to be a predefined set of values that you choose from with certain elements when you build your forms. And then so I'll be showing that to you in the context of building out a form for everybody today. And then we're going to wrap up the webinar by talking about our 3 golden rules. I end with these very intentionally because I want to make sure that I highlight them at the end, and if anything, I want to make sure that people leave this webinar remembering these golden rules because they're going to set you up for success as you build forms in the future. They're also going to help you avoid some pretty common pitfalls we see people experience if they don't follow these golden rules. So to start things off, let's talk about setting up your workspace. Now, when we're talking about building your forms for mobile data collection, understand that you are doing the data collection on a tablet or on a phone. However, the process of actually building the form is done on a laptop or a desktop. So what I'm going to be doing here is going over to my browser, and I'm going to be logging in with my webinar account. And what I want to do is go to our form builder here. Now to start things off, let's talk about the interface a little bit. You'll notice that I have a list of forms that I'm able to open and edit if I'd like. Additionally, inside of this view, I have some bubbles here that I can choose to show or hide, and this is going to give me a nice view of what I want to see here. I can also do things like check who modified the form, when it was modified, and this is just a real quick way to get some snapshot information. Another thing I'm able to do is I'm able to search for a form here. So if I have a larger library of forms, I could do something along the lines of searching for a particular word, and the forms are going to show up here so that it's easier to locate them. I also want to highlight that you'll see right now I have the forms section loaded. There is an option list section here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this in a separate tab in the background. Now I did that by holding the command button and clicking on the link. You can also right click on the link and choose open link in a new tab. So that's going to be a standard operating procedure for working inside of a web browser. One of the recommendations I have is when you're working with forms, especially when you're working with multiple forms at a time, use as many tabs as you need and open each one of those forms. If you're going to be working with the option list manager, which I'll go over to now, open that in a separate tab as well. Basically, what you want to avoid doing is you want to avoid having to go back and go in front and having to reload your page constantly. That's really going to slow you down a lot. And so I always advocate for opening up as many tabs as necessary. Now the final thing is you do have a couple of actions here real quickly. If I were to click on this middle icon here, I'm able to edit the properties of a form that are shown. I'm also able to duplicate the form as well as delete the form if I would like. Now for those people who are newer to form building and you may be nervous about deleting something accidentally, if you try to delete a form, just know that you're going to have to go through 2 checks. The first one is you're going to have to click on this checkbox here after reading this warning, saying that deleting the form is going to delete any data associated with it as well. Now, assuming you click on this checkbox, you are going to have to type in delete form as well before you can confirm the deletion. So there is a double check there. You don't have to worry about deleting something by accident, just by clicking on the wrong button. Now, what I want to do is go in and create a new form for today's webinar. I'm going to start off with my form label. And so let me go ahead and call this form Getting Started with Form Building. Now you'll notice as I type out my form label, this bottom text field got filled in as well. And this is going to be the table name. So let's start by talking about the differences between your form label as well as your table name. The form label, and really all labels throughout this process, are going to be the text that is shown on the device. So this is what the end user sees who's trying to collect data. Your form label should always be very clear, it should be conversational, and it should be direct to the user so that they know what to do and what information to put in. On the other hand, your table name, which is in lowercase down here, is going to be the actual identifier for the table in the database that stores the form data that we collect. Now, because this is a technical usage for the table name, it's going to follow a couple of rules. The first thing you'll notice is that everything is in lowercase. The second thing you probably noticed is that the spaces were replaced with underscores. These rules move towards what we call having names that are database friendly. And that's going to mean that they're allowed to be stored in the database and used. It's also going to set you up for future success if you plan on doing any sort of integration with your data in the future. By having the table name and then other name properties be database friendly, you can be more confident that the integrations that you work with are going to be as seamless as possible. You're not going to run into as many naming conflicts as if we had the table name be as flexible as you'd want it to be. I'm going to continue down and type in a quick description for my form. And I'm going to continue to scroll down, and I can choose a form icon. Now, the form icon can be really useful for helping this form be easily distinguished on my home screen, which I'll show you in a minute. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this red test icon. Now, you'll notice when I select this, the form URL is automatically loaded. This is actually the URL for the image that you see here. What this means is if you want to have a custom image for your form, you're able to do that. You just have to make sure that the URL that you're using to reference it is publicly accessible. Additionally, we always recommend to use a PNG file for these for your form icons, as well as any images throughout your forms. Now, given that our audience today is not as advanced, I'm not going to be going through these reference IDs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as well as a sort order in the label icon URL. Just know that these are advanced configurations that are going to allow you to have a more customizable experience inside of the data collection. Let me go ahead and create this form. And this is going to load up the device view for the form builder. Now there's 3 main sections here. Starting on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a scrollable list, and these are going to be the different elements that you have available to add to your forms. Now, if you remember from the beginning of this webinar, I said that an element is the fundamental building block of any form. What that means is a form is effectively made up of different elements. Now, each element is going to serve its individual purpose, and we're going to be talking through some of the more commonly used elements on today's webinar. In the middle, you're going to see a list of elements that are added to the form. Now, right now, the way the screen looks like, it looks like this is going to emulate the view that you would see on the actual device, and I want to be upfront and let everyone know that that's not actually the case. But what this is going to do is give you a very easy way of accessing certain controls that you want to use for the elements. On the right-hand side here, you're going to have element properties as well as some other sets of properties, and we'll scroll through these and talk about them after we add a couple elements to my form. So let's start off by scrolling down, and we're going to add a text element. Now, if you're talking about moving from a pencil and paper data collection project to a mobile data collection project, your text element is going to be the simplest type of data input, and it's probably going to be the one you're most comfortable with up front. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to collect the user's first name. For the label, I could enter something like this and just say first name. What I'm actually going to do instead is try to make this a little bit more conversational, engage the end user a little bit more, and I'm going to type in, please enter your first name. Now again, the label text is what is shown on the device. For my name, which is again what is used in the database, I'm going to make this a little bit different. I don't want to type that whole thing out again because that is used as an identifier, and if it becomes too long, it starts to become a little bit difficult to work with. I want to find a name that's going to be both clear as well as concise. It also has to adhere to my rules to be database friendly. So in this scenario, I'm going to type in first_name. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another text element, and we're going to ask them for their last name. And I'm going to mirror this and say last name down here. Now you'll notice over here, as I typed out the label, I had to also go in and type the name for the element. When I originally made my form, and I can go back up here to the form properties and show you, this based on label button was checked off. And so that's why this auto-populated. If I had based on label checked here, you'll notice this is going to immediately mirror my label. Now, because the label and the name serve different purposes, especially at the element level, I recommend to have this disabled so that you can have a more customized data column name. Now, as I scroll through some of these properties, let's talk about them. The first one is your description. This is just like when you add a description to the form. This is going to give you an opportunity to write some small descriptive text that you don't want shown as the label, but that you may want to use to help the data collector know what to enter here. So for example, we can say something along the lines of, don't forget to capitalize the name. As we scroll down through here, these are going to be properties that are specific to the type of element I've added to my form. You'll notice there's a drop-down menu here. I'm able to change the element's type if I would like. I'm not going to change it, and I'm also going to make note that we always recommend not to change this once you've started collecting data in your form. That's actually one of the golden rules that I'll talk about later on, but I just wanted to be really upfront and clear about that. Once you start having data, you don't want to change this element type. Some other attributes that you have available, such as encryption, so you could have your data encrypted if you would like. You're also able to disable the element, meaning it will not be shown in your data collection at all. If you'd like the element to be required, meaning it has to be filled in before you submit the record, you can do that by enabling this. Maybe you want your text element to be read only, so whatever is the value here, it can only be read. It can't enter in any information. You can select this, and then if you'd like, you can hide the typing as well. This data size is going to be a character limit associated with this element. And then the last thing I want to go through is the opportunity to choose the keyboard that you want shown by default when they enter this element on the device. I'm going to go up here and save my form. And at this point, let me jump over to my device. So you'll see I have my device set up here. I've loaded the iForm app. I've already logged in, and I have some forms shown already. Now, since I've logged in, I went ahead and created my Getting Started with Form Building form, and I've saved it. So now what I need to do is actually sync my device. When I sync my device, it's going to ping the web server. It's going to notice that there's a new form, and it's going to start downloading that information. So as it does the download, I'm going to see my form down here, Getting Started with Form Building, with the test icon. And again, that icon makes it really easy to distinguish where the form is. As I enter in the form, you'll see I have two elements visible that say, please enter your first name, please enter your last name. So I can go into the first element, I can type in, my first name. I can go into the second element and type in my last name. And you'll see the description shown down below. Now, if I want to submit this record, all I'm going to do is press done. And then you'll see that there is a hourglass icon towards the right of the screen, and that just means the record has been completed. Next time I sync my device, that record is going to be uploaded and removed from my device locally. At that point, the record is stored in cloud storage, and then that means that it's going to be backed up, and you're able to view the data from any web-enabled area. Now, what I want to do next is go through here and add another element. So let's talk about adding an email element. So I'm going to scroll up here to email. I'm going to click on email. And again, I'm going to set the label as well as the data column name to be different. So I'm going to say here, please enter your email address. I'm going to type in email. Now, as I try to save this, one of the things I always recommend to do is to save pretty frequently. This way you'll avoid losing any of the changes that you make for whatever reason. And as I scroll down here, you'll notice that the attributes are slightly different. This highlights the fact that your element properties are actually split up into categories. This top category is going to be your common properties, meaning that they are applicable to any element type that you add. down here you're going to get element specific properties. Now the send email option is pretty neat. What this means is if I enable this, whatever email address I enter in here, it's going to send a copy of that record to my email address that I have supplied. Let's go ahead and save this. Go back to my device. And what's going to happen is I'm going to sync my device to download the changes in the form. But because I also have a record that's been completed, that record will be uploaded at the same time. So a sync is really going to take care of multiple tasks altogether. From here, if I enter into my form, you'll see that the changes have been made, and it's going to ask me for my email address as well. Now this element is going to have a slightly different display. It's going to ask me for my short name or your identifier, your handle, and then the domain name I can put in below. Okay. Now I don't want to submit this record this time, so what I'm going to do is cancel out, and I'm going to discard any unsaved changes.
John, really quickly, a question came in while you're filling out the email, and it was actually about the domain list area underneath it. Do you want to bring that screen up again and show what that person was talking about?
Sure. So if I go back into the email element, there is an option down here that says please select one, and you'll see this is kind of a scrollable section. Now, one of the things you're able to do with an email element is you're able to associate an option list with it. And I haven't gotten into option lists yet. And so if you're brand new to this, that may not make sense to you. But again, an option list is just a set of predefined values. For an email element, the implication here is that you can predefine a set of domain names that they can scroll through and choose. So instead of having to type out that long domain name, zerionsoftware.com, I could have it listed here and I could just select it instead, and that'll be a faster data collection experience. Now, as I've gone through and showed you kind of how I set up my workspace a little bit, I've talked about some of the steps I like to take. I did want to do a quick review of this before I do a deeper dive into all the different elements. The first part of this as a recap is to accelerate your form building by using multiple tabs. If I was back in my form builder and I wanted to open up a separate form, I would not go back to the form view. What I would do is open a new tab, and then I would open this form in a separate tab. So now what I can do is jump back and forth. So it's going to speed up your form building process. The second thing is you're going to want to use the option list manager if you want to do some real fine tuning to your option list. And one of the main capabilities here is that you're able to upload a CSV template for your option lists. I can give you an example of this. I was building a form very recently where I had to make an option list of all the different countries that an asset could be exported to or imported to. And instead of typing those out one at a time, what I ended up doing was taking the list and adding it into a CSV template that we provide, uploading the CSV template, and that created my option list for me. And so all of that is done inside the option list manager, and that's going to accelerate the time it takes for you to build your forms. Now, the second thing is you're going to want to understand the differences between your device view and your table view. Your device view is what you've seen so far, and you're able to really quickly add elements to a form just by clicking on them on the left-hand side. The other thing is it's pretty easy to scroll through the right-hand side and view all the details of a single element. What I want to show you next is the table view, and the table view is going to be really good for seeing the relationship between different elements. Instead of looking at an element one at a time, what I can do is go up here and click on the table view icon, and you'll see it's going to give me a table very similar to the home page of the form builder. From this page, I'm able to view different properties if I would like. I'm able to hide certain properties if I want, such as my label. And this is going to allow me to do things like take this text, copy and paste it, or if I want to set a default email, I can do this. Confirm this. I want to set a default first name, I can do that as well. And a default last name. I'm going to save again. You'll notice how these values are yellow. Once this is saved, those colors are going to go back to white, meaning the save has been made. Now from this view, you are still able to add elements. So what I'm going to do next is click on the plus sign here to add another element. I'm going to add a location element. But you'll notice that this is going to be a little bit more difficult to fully customize one single element. So even though I have this added here and I'm able to do it, I want to go back to my device view, find my element, and I'm going to modify it here. Now, what I've added right now is a location element. This is going to be an element that will capture the GPS location based on my mobile device. I'm going to go ahead and call this location, and I'm doing this on purpose. What's going to happen is when I try to save this, you're going to see I get an error here. This is going to highlight in red. It's going to say the name is a reserved word. I get an error message up here as well. Name is a reserved word. It's sort order 3. What that means is this is sort order 0, 1, 2, 3. That's where my mistake is. So the form builder is going to give you a hint of where to go. Now the reason I've gotten this error is because my data column name is on what's called our reserved word list. And by clicking on this link, you'll be able to see that. Oops. Let's do this one more time. And you'll see that this link here is going to bring us to a list of reserved words. Your data column name cannot be these words. Now, if you want, you can have your data column name include the word, just not be an exact match. So if I save this, now I'm good to go. But the reason these words are not allowed to be used is because they have significance, whether it's in Form Builder or in JavaScript or in the database language. And so you just want to be careful of this. Anytime this happens, just know that that's what you need to change, and you need to avoid those reserved words. Location is one of the most common ones we see, along with date and time. Those 3 are probably the most popular ones, as well as name. Actually, those 4, I would say, to keep an eye out for and make sure that you don't try to use them as a data column name standalone by themselves. I'm going to go back to my device, refresh, and show you what the location element looks like. While I do that, Barrett, I want to check in to see if there have been any questions I could answer.
So there have been some questions. There's actually a question about the GPS location and if you're able to load the GPS location into a layer for the ARC map.
Yeah, and so this is again jumping ahead a little bit, but you are able to integrate with ESRI, which is a GIS company that's going to allow you to take a pinpoint or a drop point from ESRI and associate record data with it. It's also going to allow you to do the opposite, right? So instead of being in your form and applying an ESRI pinpoint to your form, you could start from ESRI in their connector, and then you can actually take that data and pull it down into iForm Builder as well.
Great. There was one other question, and it's about handling option lists that may be dynamic and not static, and what the best way is to handle it. For this specific person, they're trying to get information from multiple systems and have it go into the option list, and the information can change daily, weekly, depending. And so they're trying to figure out what the best way would be. And I know some of this goes beyond form building, but I was hoping that maybe you could speak of it. So if anyone else has that same kind of question, then you can answer it for them.
Yeah, definitely. So this does get a little bit beyond the scope of the webinar, but I do want to still address it. The ability to change values in an option list is something that you can definitely do. You want to do it with some caution because that could have implications of affecting your existing data. That being said, you can go into the option list manager and change them manually. You're also able to use what's called the API. If you want to write a custom API script, if you're a little bit more comfortable with that, you're able to use that to dynamically adjust option lists as well. And then finally, we do offer some other integration options internally that we can use to help you modify and control those option lists. If you still have more questions, if anyone has more questions about that, continue to ask them. Most likely what will happen is I'll see if we can take that discussion offline after the webinar, and we can sit down one-on-one, have a discussion around what your business goals are and what you're trying to accomplish, and then find a solution to that. Now, while we were asking that question, I went ahead and filled out this GPS location element. I'll do it one more time real briefly, but once I open it, it's going to have this view with your lat and long. If I want to refresh this, I can. And then by pressing done, it's going to capture that information for me to have inside of my record. I'm going to again finish this record, and I'm actually going to sync my device for now and let that upload to the web server. So again, just to recap, let's use the device view, which was the original view we were in, to add elements to your form. Also use it to configure a single element and get a full list of all those details. If you're working inside of your table view, you're doing that because you want to see the relationship between different elements. A lot of times that's going to be for the purpose of copy and pasting values from one property to another. Now let's move on to the next section of the webinar, which is going to be the elements of form building. The way I like to describe form building is there's over 35 different elements, so it's really, really hard to keep track of all of them. But what I've done is I've broken them down to 6 different categories. Each category is going to have a significant purpose around it, and I'm going to talk through those one at a time as I go through each category. Now, as Barrett mentioned, we are going to be sending everybody a copy of the slides that I'm using as a PDF. Anything that is underlined is also a hyperlink, and these are going to specifically link you to articles in our Customer Success Center to help you implement using these elements. Now, the first category of elements I have are our standard elements, and if you see by the title, this slide is called Substituting Paper for Mobile. These elements are going to be very close to a straight substitution for how you would have an experience on a paper form versus a mobile form. Things like a text input are going to be no different, except instead of using your hand to write, you're using a keyboard. But these are things that you're going to see on a regular paper form, such as a date, a signature, a text area, or a number. Now, these are actually elements that we want to try to move away from, and that's why I always introduce these first. Because instead of saying, hey, let's use these elements, what I want to highlight is the reasons you want to choose a specific element. Ultimately, what you're really trying to do is make sure that you can collect data faster and better, and then more consistently. So in order to do that, what you need to do is simplify the collection process for your field inspectors. That means you're going to want to choose the element that can be filled out the fastest. Along with that speed increase, though, you also want to make sure that you're reducing the chance that they have to make a mistake. For example, if I'm entering in an age, I don't want to use a text element, even though I can capture the age appropriately. But I don't want the opportunity to put in character data there. I only want numeric data. If we extend that even further, we could use, instead of a number element, which would allow them to put in things like a negative value or a decimal value or a number that's clearly out of range, you may want to use the actual range element, which you set a minimum and a maximum boundary, and it's going to look like a slider that you can choose. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a little bit. Finally, the third reason you want to choose a particular element is you want to be able to standardize or homogenize the data. Going back to option lists, and you're going to see this as a recurring theme throughout the rest of this webinar, option lists are going to hit all 3 of these different criteria, specifically the standardizing of your data, because you're choosing from a predefined list. So you get to control exactly how the data looks when it is input. All of this is going to lead towards the data collector having to interact less and less with the form, and that's actually a positive thing. The last thing you want is the data collector having to do a lot of manual entry and having to be in the form longer than is necessary. You want the form to work for them, not the other way around. The next category of elements are going to be our enhancement elements. I like to frame these elements as opportunities to augment your data collection project because you're working on a mobile device specifically. The one I always highlight here that really drives home this the benefit here is the image element, and in association with that, the drawing element as well. So the image element is going to allow you to take a photo using your device's camera, or if you have an image that's already saved, you can use that as your photo as well. The drawing element adds an additional functionality of being able to annotate that image, having a drawing layer on top of it. Now keep in mind, if you use the drawing element, your image is one layer, and then whatever you annotate is going to be a second layer. You've effectively doubled the size of your image. So if you are doing data collection in an area where connection may not be very strong, or your records are getting very large, you want to be careful about that because the image files can impact the performance of the sync process. Right now, my forms are pretty small. They only have a couple of elements on them, so they sync very quickly. But if my records were very large, had a lot of images, then that sync upload process would take longer. Now, the reason I use the image element to highlight this is because if you go back to the process of a pencil and paper data collection project, if you were to take a picture of your site or whatever you're inspecting, you would need to then print out that picture later on and attach it or fix it somehow to that record, that paper document, whether it's a staple or a paper clip. However you're going to do that, you have to manually make that connection. But because we're on a digital platform, we're able to have that connection happen automatically, and you don't need to do that after the fact. That's going to make sure that you don't lose data. It's going to make sure also that your data stays connected even after it's been submitted. Some other elements I want to highlight here are the location element, which I showed you as a GPS lat long. Also, subforms are a really key element type here. And without getting into too much detail, a subform is just going to be a way of taking a different form you've made and invoking it within one form. So if I have this form that I'm creating for an employee registration, I may have a subform, which is a section for mailing information. I may have another subform for job history. And so that would be a completely independent form that I make, but I can use it inside of what's called my parent form, the employee information one. The last element I'll speak to is the assign to element. This is going to enable the feature of taking this record, and when I submit the record, once it's uploaded, it's also going to end up being assigned to a particular user. So for example, if I want to fill out an inspection form, and then if I have this element at the bottom, I could say choose Barrett's username and assign it to her. When that record gets submitted, it would then be assigned to her username, pushed to her device, and then she can take that record, review it, make updates to it if she'd like, and then sync it back up to the web server again afterwards. Our third group of elements are going to be our scanning and hardware elements. The one I want to highlight here is the Manatee Works element. This is going to be our generic barcode scanner, which uses your device's camera to scan the barcode. It supports a variety of different symbologies, including QR codes and then different barcode lengths. So if you want to get more information on that, again, I would follow the link here, or if you can't wait for these PDFs to be sent to you, feel free to get to our Customer Success Center and use the search to find the articles on this as well. Our masking elements are going to be a very small group of elements, but they serve a very important purpose. Your mask is going to be a predefined format for your input. The easiest way to explain this is by talking about our Social Security number element. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Social Security number, it's just a personal identifier for an individual, and it has a very strict format where it's going to be 3 numbers, a hyphen, 2 numbers, a hyphen, and then 4 numbers at the end. Because you know the Social Security number is always going to meet that format, you want to create what's called a mask so that the user must enter in information in adherence with that format. To create a mask, you're going to use the characters down below. You'll use a pound symbol for only numeric information. You can use the question mark for an alphabetic character. And then down here, you'll see there are options for optional characters as well. The zip code takes advantage of this, where you're going to have 5 required numeric values, and then a hyphen, and then 4 optional numeric values as a secondary suffix for your zip code. Our fifth, second to last category is our appearance elements. This is going to be the smallest category, and it's really the most straightforward one. These elements don't have any sort of an input associated with them. They're used cosmetically, but it's not just about the form looking pretty. The idea here is you want to improve the usability for the field inspector or the end user. You want to use divider elements to split up sections of your form so it's easier for them to keep track of where they are. You also want to use label elements to provide descriptive text for the user so that they either A, have better instructions on the form, or B, sometimes there are long pieces of text that they either have to read out to whoever they are surveying, or it can be used as a reference as well. But either way, the label text is going to be intended to help the data collector collect data. Now, before I get into the final category, Barrett, I want to check in really quickly again. Are there any questions that have been asked since the last time I checked in with you?
There have been some questions. I've gone ahead and responded to them. One thing I know you'll go through at the end of the session, but I just want to reiterate now. If there is anything, any feature that we do not have currently in the platform, we have a wonderful community forum for you to post those ideas in. And in a few minutes, I'll put the link in the chat section so everyone can have access to it as well.
Awesome. So the last category I have here is our option-based elements. And I saved this for last always because, as the title states, I always consider this the preferred data input whenever possible. Now there's 3 main types of option-based elements. All of them are going to have an option list associated with them, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit. But your option-based elements are going to allow you to have a predefined set of values, and then they're going to be able to control how the user chooses them. Now I have a real small decision tree down here below that's going to guide you in selecting which option-based element you want to pick for your data collection point. The first question you have to ask yourself is if from that option list you want to be able to choose multiple values, or if you're only going to be choosing a single option. So imagine a single option being a multiple choice test. Multiple options would be something along the lines of a prompt that says, choose all that apply. If you want multiple options, your decision has already been made for you. You have to use a multi-select element. That's the only option-based element that will allow you to choose multiple options from an option list. Now, under the assumption you're working with a single selection, then the next question you have to ask yourself is if you want to, or if you have a shorter option list or a longer option list. Now, the cutoff to decide if it's short or if it's long is going to depend on a couple of factors. The first one is going to be the length of your option labels. If your labels are longer, then you're going to only be able to have a smaller number fit on your screen. So your list, which would be considered short, would be fewer. The other thing that will impact this is the device size. If you're working with a tablet, then you're going to be able to fit more options along a row if you're choosing a select element for a short list. Otherwise, you'll have to switch to a pick list, which is going to open up a secondary screen that allows you to scroll through the options. It also allows you to search for an option if you would like. Now what I want to do here is jump back over to my form builder. Oh, you'll notice we got this quick message here and a little alert that's asking if I want to save. That's going to be a helpful way to make sure that I'm saving my form every time and I'm not going to lose anything that I've been working on. Now from here, let's go ahead and add some of the elements we just talked about. The first thing I want to do, I'm going to add a divider element to separate this top piece from what I'm doing next underneath. So let's go ahead and add in a range element. And we're going to say, rate this webinar on a scale of 1 to 5. So I'll say webinar rating for my data column name. And down here, I'm able to set in low and high values. So this is going to allow me to choose the boundaries that I want allowed for my element. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a counter element underneath this. I'm going to say rate the presenter on a scale of 1 to 5. We'll say presenter rating. And then down here, you'll notice that I don't have those boundaries anymore. So this is going to highlight the fact that certain elements are going to behave differently and have different customizations relative to one another. Let's save this form, go back to my device and sync it, and we'll see how each of these elements behaves differently. Now the top element down here below is my range element, and you'll see that I'm able to slide this, okay, from 1 to 5, which can be really helpful. Down underneath, I'm able to press the plus sign to go up and the minus sign to go down. Now, given the fact that I have a clear scale and boundary set up for this data collection point, the range element is going to be the superior element to choose. The counter element would allow me to go outside of the range I want, and that's not something that you want to have happen in your data collection project. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add in a couple of option lists here. So I'm going to use yet another divider to separate this. And what I want to do is I want to add a select element for the question, are you a current user? Which is the poll that we launched earlier today. Current user. Now what I'm able to do is for my option list, I'm able to associate an option list with this element right away. Or if I want, I can create a new list from the Inline manager here. I'm going to name my option list and click and create. And I'm able to add labels and key values here. Now your label, just like everything else, is going to be the text you see on the screen. The key value is going to be the actual value that is stored in the database table. So this has to be unique. This should be database friendly as well. Finally, your sort order is going to be the arrangement of the elements. I'm going to save this option list. I'm going to search for it. Uh-oh. Let's see what we get here. I think I may have overwritten another option list. Not a problem. We'll just redo this one more time. You can save. And then assign this option list to this element. Now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and add in a pick list. We're going to grab a random option list from the ones that we already have. Let's use this states one. You'll see this is just going to be, this is actually not states, but this is countries, it looks like. But we can assign this option list here and add in a new label. Please select a country. And it looks like this is going to be a reserved word, so we can't use this one. Change the name, save it one more time. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Anytime you run into a reserved word, it's a very quick fix. As I sync my device and I reload the form, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the difference between a select and a pick list and talk about the pros and cons a bit. So inside of a select element at the top, you'll see it's shown inline in the front of the form, which is nice. It's going to be a really quick way to get that data point by selecting. The pick list, however, is going to, whoops, looks like it did not save my selection. Let's try this one more time. I'm actually going to refresh my builder for a second. And then can choose a different one. Let's see here. We're just going to pick a random one for the sake of time right now. Assign. We can say, please select a manufacturer. Resave this and then resync my device. And then while this is syncing, Barrett, I'm going to check in again to see if there are any questions.
Not that I haven't answered. I think everyone's on board with what you're going through right now.
Okay. So I just wanted to show everybody what the pick list looks like. You'll see this is a scrollable list through here. Now, if you have a lot of options inside of this pick list, what you may want to do instead is use the search up here. And as I type in values, you'll see it's going to segment that option list and show me only the ones that match my search criteria. Okay. Now, what I want to do next, after we've gone through all these different elements, is I do want to talk about option lists a little bit more. I've actually covered a lot of the content I had around option lists, so this section is really going to be more of a recap than anything else. The first thing is understanding the 3 key properties of your option list. Again, the label text is going to be what's shown on the device. Make sure it's clear and concise. And I do want to note, as an extension off of today's webinar, that label text can also be localized. So what that means is you can set up the label text, and this isn't only for an option list actually, but for elements as well, where depending on the device's language, you can have different label text shown. What this means is you can develop your form in English, and if you have Spanish-speaking end users, you can localize that form in Spanish, and if that's the language on their device, they'll have Spanish labels displayed. Now, your key value is going to be the unique identifier for each option. You want to avoid using special characters, and in some cases, you may want to mirror the label text, and that includes the ability to use an uppercase character. Now, that's not going to be as restrictive as your data column names. Key values aren't quite as difficult to work with. They're not quite as restrictive in terms of what is allowed in. But sometimes if you want the text to show a certain way, you can type it in that way into the key value. But the biggest thing is to make sure to avoid special characters, because that does have to be the capability of potentially breaking a key value. You also want to make sure that they stay unique inside of that option list. And finally, your sort order is what you're going to use to control the arrangement of your options. The option with the sort order of 0 is going to show first, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 down in a descending fashion. When you are working with your option list and you start working with smart controls, which based on the poll, no one's working with yet, so I'm not going to go too far into it, just know that you're able to use your sort order in those values, and you can use it for comparing a range of options. So for example, if you want to have the element shown if only one of the last 4 options is picked, you can do that using your sort order, saying, hey, if this element's sort order is greater than a particular value, let's show this other element. The second thing I want to highlight with option lists is to use either the inline view, which I showed you today, to either assign an existing option list, that's what we did with the pick list, or you can create a simple list inline here, and that's what we did with our select element. And make sure you save those option lists, because otherwise you may lose your values like I did. And then if you're not working with the inline manager, you are able to work with the option list manager, which we're not showing today, but just note that the option list manager is going to give you a greater level of detail. It's going to allow you to be a little bit more specific. It's basically more powerful all around, especially when you talk about managing larger option lists. Make sure to take advantage of the CSV upload. And that's going to bring us to the final section of this webinar, which are our form building golden rules. Now, we have 3 golden rules that we always like to highlight here. Again, I've actually talked through a lot of this content already, but I want to circle back and make sure that I emphasize this, because it'll help you avoid those common pitfalls, such as even something as serious as losing data that you've collected. Now, the first one is you want to make sure that you test your forms before going live. And so what that means is, as I'm building out my forms and I think that they're ready to go, I want to make sure that I've extensively tested these forms. Now, the first way you want to make sure you test, you want to make sure you're testing on all device types and sizes that are going to be actually used. So that means if you're working with only iOS, then that's fine. But if you're working with both iOS and Android, test on both operating systems. Furthermore, if you're using both tablets and phones, you want to test on both device sizes also. What this means is you could ultimately be testing on 4 different device types or 4 different devices based on the 2 operating systems and the 2 device sizes, but that's going to ensure that you have consistent data collection regardless of the device type that you have for your end user. The other thing is you want to try to use your form in field tests if possible. From personal experience, I've gone through this process where sitting in an office building a form and trying to test out the form is a very different experience compared to using it out in the field, whether you are in a remote area, in a rural area where you may not have connection, or you might be in an area like a foresty area where the terrain could be more difficult. But you want to make sure that your end users are part of this testing process. You want to get information from them on how usable the form is, how clear the text is, and then you also want to get a variety of different data inputs. I know that I'm guilty of this when I test forms. Sometimes I'll just put in dummy data for each of the different elements, but that may not cover all the different possibilities. And you want to make sure, again, the purpose of your testing is to make sure that you're prepared for all scenarios that you can encounter. Our second golden rule is that you have to make sure you want to use meaningful data column names. As a recap, your data column name is the element's identifier. It has to be unique inside of the form, and it has to be database friendly. So that means lowercase letters, underscores instead of spaces. And as an added piece here, you want to make sure that your data column names stay short, but you want to make sure that they're descriptive and have some sort of a naming convention. If you notice, and I can go back into here in the form builder very quickly, if I add a new element, you'll see it's going to default to my element 10, my element 10. And I know Barrett has experienced this as well as I have, where we'll see people's forms and they just have my element 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down to like 56. And at that point, it's really difficult to know what the element is used for other than going in here and scrolling through them. You want to make sure you take the time to modify that data column and make sure that it's descriptive and that it's clear and communicates to whether it is a manager who's exporting the data or a developer who's working on an integration, what that data point represents. And finally, our third golden rule, and this is really the most important one, so again, save for last, is in order to avoid data loss while updating your forms, you want to make sure that you do not change the element's data type, the element's data size, or whether that element is encrypted or not. Changing any of these 3 properties is going to incur data loss if you have data stored in that element. Basically, what happens here is changing these 3 properties. Instead of doing an update in the database for that column, the change is drastic enough that what will happen is it will delete that column and recreate it with the new configuration. Now, if that's to happen, then the data that is stored in that column will be deleted and lost. So you want to make sure not to change either of these 3 properties. There is a warning text in the form builder that lets you know that changing the input type, data size, or encryption for an element will drop the column from the database and all existing data will be erased. So make sure you keep an eye on this. Make sure you remember not to change those properties. Now, in the event that you do need to make a change to one of those properties, and that will happen during your form building experiences, instead of changing the original element, what we recommend doing is a process of duplicating the original element, making the adjustments on the new element, and then finally, as a third step, disabling the original element so that it's no longer a part of your data collection. Now, by disabling it, you're not deleting it. All that old data still stays there. The only difference is your new element with the adjusted properties will be shown to the data collector. And so for their side, you have a changed seamless experience, but in terms of your data, you haven't lost anything. Now, Barrett, that brings me to the end of the content I had for this webinar. I do want to just highlight a couple of different ways you can continue the conversation. As Barrett said, we do have a nice community forum where we all try to interact with different members of our community. This is great for feature requests. It's great if you have some pretty simple questions as well. You can ask them up there. Not only will you get insight from us as a team, but you'll also get insight from other customers and other people who have been experienced working with form building in the past. Continue to check out our webinars, and if you want to get more formal training, you can enroll in our certifications. We're done for certifications for 2017, but we will be resuming the form building certifications in early 2018. We had those 2 links at the beginning to the Zerion blog. We have people in-house who are subject matter experts in the realm of data collection, specifically for certain industries as well, and we always try to get them to share their experiences through the blog. And so if you want to learn more information from the team, that's a great resource. And then finally, for general questions, looking for information and documentation, the Customer Success Center is the place to go for all of that. Now, Barrett, are there any final questions for me before we close out this webinar?
Nope, just a big thank you to you for getting us all ready and getting people up to speed with form building, and thank you everyone for attending.